Hello, welcome, Jai Hind. Welcome to another episode of the Nancoverse podcast. Today is the 27th of November, and I look forward to reading the news to you. In today's episode, we will be talking about some very interesting and important stories. At first, we will be talking about how the government has decided to take its apex cybersecurity agency out of the public's right to know. The name of this agency is Cert-In, which is the Indian Computer Emergency Response Team. I kind of imagine it to be like a building filled with a lot of geeks which are like kind of typing away and trying to find the hackers. But with the government, you never know. The government has decided to take out this body out of the ambit of the Right to Information Act. And I'm sure there's some reasons behind it, but it's an interesting story, so I would want to read about it. And this is a story by Hari Krishnan Sharma in the Indian Express, and it goes as follows. Government takes apex cybersecurity agency out of the public's right to know. The centre, which is the union government, has exempted the Indian Computer Emergency Response Team, which short forms comes to Cert-In, the national nodal agency to deal with cybersecurity threats like hacking and phishing, from the purview of the Right to Information Act 2005. A notification of this effect was issued by the Department of Personnel and Training (DOPT) on Thursday. The centre has used its powers given under subsection 2 of section 24 of the RTI Act to exempt Cert-In from the purview of transparency law. Using those powers, the centre has included Cert-In at serial number 27 in the second schedule of the RTI Act. The Cert-In comes under the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. In March this year, Minister of State for Electronics and Information Technology, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, had informed Rajya Sabha that the procedure of interdepartmental consultation was on to discuss the exemption of the Cert-In from the RTI Act. Cert-In sounds like certain, but it's CERT-In, which is the Indian Computer Emergency Response Team. The Right to Information Act 2005 is administered by the Department of Personnel and Training, which has appraised that a proposal of the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology for exemption of the Indian Computer Emergency Response Team from the said Act by the way of inclusion of Cert-In in the second schedule to the Act was received and procedure of interdepartmental consultation, including with the Ministry of Law and Justice, was undertaken in respect of the same. Chandrasekhar said in written reply to a question asked by BJP member Amar Patnaik. With inclusion in the second schedule of the RTI Act, the Cert-In now joins the list of 26 other intelligence and security organizations which are already exempted from the purview of the Act. These 22 intelligence and security organizations are Intelligence Bureau, RAW, including its technical wing, namely the Aviation Research Center of the Cabinet Secretariat, Central Economic Intelligence Bureau, Directorate of Enforcement, Narcotics Control Bureau, Special Frontier Force, BSF, Central Reserve Police Force, which is CRPF, Indo-Tibetan Border Police, Central Industrial Security Force, National Security Guards, Assam Rifles, Rashtra Seema Bal, Directorate General of Income Tax, and a host of other such agencies which come in under the intelligence security organizations. It's a long list of about 26 intelligence and security organizations. These people seem like the real OG. They can't even be questioned. I mean, they're then exempted under the RTI Act. But they are very important organizations that handle a lot of confidential information. And I'm sure there's some reason behind the government wanting to take them out of the RTI Act. But whenever it comes to a decision made by the government, there's always a question of why are you doing this? And is there something to hide? However, these have been taken out from the RTI. Under Section 24 of the RTI Act, certain organizations are exempted from the law. Nothing contained in this Act shall apply to the intelligence and security organizations specified in the second schedule. being organizations established by the central government or any information furnished by such organizations to that government, provided that the information pertaining to the allegations of corruption and human rights violations shall not be excluded under this subsection, which is good. The human rights violation and corruption can be included, okay? Provided further that in the case of information sought for is in respect of allegations of violations of human rights, the information shall only be provided after the approval of the Central Information Commission and notwithstanding anything contained in Section 7. Such information shall be provided within 45 days from the date of the receipt of request. The RTI law empowers the Centre to amend second schedule by including therein any other intelligence or security organization established by it or omitting therefrom any organization already specified therein. The Centre can amend the second schedule through a notification in the official gazette. Such notifications shall be laid before each House of Parliament. So this is an interesting story to me because I feel the right to information was one of those landmark acts that provided citizens, organizations, and even media houses to kind of do some real investigation about government bodies that are responsible for the lives of so many people. There is many times been so many stories that have come out from the right to information where corruption, where irregularities have come to the surface and those organizations and the people who are heading them have been held accountable. So this is an interesting story and I would want to know about what the CERT does, where all has it actually helped the nation to thwart an attack. Hacking is something that is a reality in the 21st century. China has a very strong cybersecurity firewall that they've created for their internet. Even the United States is a pioneer. There are many non-state actors that use the internet to attack official websites. This happens all the time. It is good to know that we have an organization like this in our security establishment and that we do care about cybersecurity. Keeping this out of the RTI is also an interesting development by the ministry. So let's see where this goes. The next story that I want to read about is about the sickle cell disease and also about thalassemia. And the first therapy in recent times that has been approved by a UK drug regulator, which is quite commonly called the Crispr technology. This is the gene editing technology that also won its innovators a Nobel Prize in 2020. So there is talk about using the CRISPR technology and precise gene editing to help provide a therapy for the people who suffer from sickle cell. I would like to read a bit about what sickle cell is, what thalassemia is, what is the burden that India faces in the global scenario for this disease, and how we can provide relief to the people who are actually going through sickle cell or through thalassemia. I don't know if any of my listeners knows anyone or is someone that suffers from this rare disease. However, there was also an interesting story done by Anona Dutt herself, who has written this, about how the Indian government is trying to create generic medicines for these rare conditions to provide relief to people who have them. These medications are extremely expensive and there needs to be production for them in a generic way so that more people have access and can afford them. So this story is written by Anona Dutt in the Indian Express, and it says sickle cell breakthrough. The first therapy based on gene editing technology, CRISPR, for sickle cell disease and thalassemia has been approved in the UK. The potential for India is revolutionary. However, cost is a huge deterrent currently. To access CRISPR, it sure is a big cost for the people who want to do something like this. But I would like to read more so that my listeners and me are more informed about this. The UK drug regulator last week approved a gene therapy. The UK drug regulator last week approved a gene therapy for the cure of sickle cell disease and thalassemia, seen as a landmark breakthrough by many. This is the first licensed therapy in the world based on the gene editing technology, CRISPR, that earned its innovators a Nobel Prize in 2020. The quote, genetic scissors that became available for the first time in 2012 have revolutionized the field of biotechnology. Called Casgevy, spelled as Casgevy, the therapy edits the faulty gene that leads to these blood disorders, potentially curing the person for life. So far, the only permanent treatment has been a bone marrow transplant for which a closely matched donor is needed. So how does the therapy even work? It's a very legit question. How does the therapy work? Both sickle cell disease and thalassemia are caused by errors in the gene for hemoglobin, a protein in the red blood cells that carry oxygen to the organs and tissues. I think this is some basic biology that I remember from school as well, that hemoglobin carries oxygen to the organs and tissues of the body. The therapy uses the patient's own blood stem cells, which are precisely edited using Crispr, a gene called BCL11A, which is crucial for switching from fetal to adult hemoglobin, is targeted by the therapy. Fetal hemoglobin, which is naturally present in everyone at birth, does not carry the same abnormalities as adult hemoglobin. The therapy uses the body's own mechanisms to start producing more of this fetal hemoglobin, alleviating the symptoms of the two conditions. When I say fetal, this is the fetus, like when we are little children inside our mother's wombs, fetal hemoglobin, alleviating the symptoms of the two conditions. What are the sickle cell diseases and thalassemia? This is a good question because this addresses the basic mechanisms of what this is and what are we talking about. So what is sickle cell disease and thalassemia? The genetic error in sickle cell disease leads to red blood cells assuming a crescent shape, unlike the disc-shaped normal cells. The sickle cell-like cells cannot move around easily in the vessels, resulting in blocked blood flow. This can lead to episodes of severe pain, life-threatening infections, anemia, or a stroke. An estimated 30,000 to 40,000 children in India are born with this disorder every year. That's a lot. The symptoms manifest in people who inherit a pair of damaged genes from both parents. Those who carry only one copy of the gene from one parent can lead a normal life. This is the same as thalassemia, in which people who inherit a pair of genes from both parents experience symptoms like severe anemia. Thalassemia leads to low levels of hemoglobin, leading to fatigue, shortness of breath, and irregular heartbeats. People with the condition need blood transfusions throughout their life. The transfusions also lead to accumulation of excess iron in the body, for which they need a process called chelation. 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 Interesting. India also has the largest number of children with thalassemia, major in world, about 1.5 lakh people. So India shares the biggest burden of thalassemia in the world. I did not know this. What have the trials shown so far? For sickle cell disease, 45 people received Casgevy. Casgevy is that same process which we read about earlier, where the therapy edits the faulty gene. So going back to the process, the therapy that they found using Crispr, which is Casgevy, they did a study and 45 people received Casgevy. Only 29 of these patients had been in the trial long enough for the interim analysis on which the approval is based. All but one of these 29 trials participated had no severe pain crisis for at least 12 months after the treatment. So out of 29 trial participants, 28 people found relief from this therapy, which is called Casgevy, which is a part of Crispr, which is the gene therapy. The therapy has been administered to 54 persons with thalassemia for the trial. Of them, 42 were in the trial long enough for the interim analysis. 39 of the 42 patients did not need a transfusion for at least 12 months after the treatment. The need for transfusion dropped by 70% in the other three. This is great. So if any technology can help people alleviate their pain, can help people lead a longer life and a better life, most importantly, through this therapy, It sounds good. At least there's some breakthrough through science. Cost is still a huge deterrent, as we read earlier. But let's deep down further. Question: how is the therapy prepared and given? Casgevy is one-time treatment for which the doctor has to first collect blood stem cells from the bone marrow using a process called apheresis, used to filter out the blood for different components. The cells are then sent to the manufacturing site, where it takes about 6 months for them to be edited and tested. Before a transplant with the edited cells, the doctor gives a conditioning medicine for a few days to clear the bone marrow of other cells that will be replaced by the modified cells. The patient has to stay in hospital for at least a month so that the edited cells take up residence in the bone marrow and start making red blood cells with normal hemoglobin. Side effects from the treatment are similar to those associated with autologous stem cells transplants, including nausea, fatigue, fever, and increased risk of infection. Question: what are the challenges of this treatment? Although the price of the therapy hasn't been announced, it is likely to be very high. Damn, everything costs money, and this costs money as well. People who are born with this disorder did not ask for it. They will have to pay a lot of price for it for now. It's also a newer therapy, something that won its innovators a Nobel Prize in 2020. Estimates suggest it could be as much as $2 million per patient. That's a lot of money, $2 million, which is in line with other gene therapies. Cost is one of the biggest limitations of newer gene therapies, along with the absence of local manufacturing facilities, which means that the harvested blood stem cells have to be sent across countries. Quote: this is extremely encouraging, as this is the first CRISPR-based therapy that has been approved. But the pricing will be a major challenge, especially because a high proportion of people with these conditions live in poorer countries and are unlikely to be able to afford the therapy. A clear case of the haves and haves not. The hope remains that people are able to have access to this therapy in the coming times, as this therapy becomes more accessible and more widely accepted and practiced within the country as well. Especially in places where people need this therapy, it should be provided to them. So the next story that I would want to move on to is an interesting one, and this has to do with geopolitics, pharmaceuticals, especially big pharma, and how the big pharma companies have made sure that the poorer countries don't have access to life-saving drugs, and how those smaller, poorer countries are fighting against the big pharma to ensure that their populations get the medicines that they require, especially for cases such as people having HIV, coronavirus, tuberculosis, and things around those lines, where patients suffer a lot, but big pharma profits a lot because of their suffering. This is a story about patents. More importantly, this is also a story about how big pharma can lead to solutions, but it can also lead to a lot of profiteering off of diseases. After losing in COVID vaccine race, poor nations push back against big pharma. South Africa, Colombia, and other countries that lost out in the global race for coronavirus vaccines are taking a more combative approach towards drug makers and pushing back on policies that deny cheap treatment to millions of people with tuberculosis and HIV. Experts see it as a shift in how such countries deal with pharmaceutical behemoths and say it could trigger more efforts to make life-saving medicines widely available. In the COVID-19 pandemic, rich countries bought most of the world's vaccines early, leaving few shots for poor countries and creating disparity. Now, poorer countries are trying to become more self-reliant because they've realized after COVID they can't count on anyone else. One of the targets is a drug, bedqueline, that is used for treating people with drug-resistant versions of tuberculosis. The pills are especially important for South Africa, where TB killed more than 50,000 people in 2021, making it the country's leading cause of death. In July, Johnson & Johnson's patent on the drug expired in South Africa, but the country had it extended until 2027, enraging activists. The South African government then began investigating the company's pricing policies. It had been paying about 5,400 rand, which is about $282 per treatment course, more than twice as much as poor countries that got the drug via a global effort called the Stop TB Partnership. So they were overcharging South African patients for the same pills that could have been given for a lot lesser price. And they even extended their patents, which means that generic drug makers can't make the same medicines for their people. In September, J&J announced it would drop its patent in more than 130 countries, allowing generic makers to copy the drug, which is great. So Johnson & Johnson decided that it will drop the patent. In Colombia, the government declared last month it would issue a compulsory license for the HIV drug dolutegravir without permission from the drug's patent holder, Viv Healthcare. Some experts said much more needs to change before poorer countries can produce their own medicines. When the pandemic hit, Africa produced fewer than 1% of all vaccines made globally, but used more than half of the world's supply, according to Petro Treblanc, managing director of some country, I don't care. Back then, President Nelson Mandela's government in South Africa eventually suspended patents to allow wider access to AIDS drugs. That prompted more than 30 drug makers to take it to court in 1998. Challenging pharmaceutical companies is just one piece to ensuring Africa has equal access to treatment and vaccines. Some experts pointed out South Africa's own intellectual property laws still haven't changed sufficiently and make it too easy for pharmaceutical companies to acquire patents and extend their monopolies. In its annual report on TB released earlier this month, the World Health Organization said there were more than 10 million people sickened by the disease last year and 1.3 million deaths. This is an interesting story because it really talks about self-reliance in a very important sphere of national existence almost, where people need these drugs, but Big Pharma is able to hold its patents and overcharge people for the drugs that they need desperately. One side of the story is where people actually advocate for big pharmas to have their patents, because why else would they want to come up with the cure? How else are they going to make the money? And why would they want to create a cure or have disease or have medicines for diseases that people need and then not be able to pay their innovators? That's the thing. They're trying to make the money. They're trying to make as much money as possible after developing drugs for diseases. But then there are a lot of countries that are poorer economically and are not able to afford these things. As we read, like Colombia actually just went rogue and they're like, dude, we'll just like make the HIV drug without giving a fuck about the patent. So this is pretty cool and an interesting story according to me. So this marks the end of today's Nancoverse episode. I'm glad that you guys tuned in. Thank you so much for listening to the episode, and I hope I was able to bring some value to your day. There's a lot going on in this world right now. As we speak, Ukraine is at war with Russia and vice versa. Gaza is under attack by Israel, and Israel was under attack by Hamas on October the 7th. India is also very eventful at this point. Next year is the union elections. Every 5 years, the Indian populace decides who they want to have in the central government, and that is going to be decided next year. In the first week of December, we're going to have the results for 5 state elections. There have been multiple terrorist attacks in multiple districts of Jammu and Kashmir. Recently, there was an encounter where a few of our soldiers were martyred. Pollution remains one of the bigger issues in the northern Indian parts, especially Delhi, which has an AQI of over 400 for the past I don't know how many weeks. In fact, I'm here and my brain hurts. Like, I'll be very honest. I don't know if you guys can hear it in my sound. The pollution is really bad and it affects people on a long-term basis. For people who can't afford air purifiers, it's very difficult. For people who can't work from home, it's even more difficult because they have to be outside to make a livelihood. Old people, children are coughing. things are difficult. There's been a lot of progress as well. We have reached the moon with Chandrayaan 3 reaching the moon. A great feat, a great accomplishment by ISRO. And there's Aditya L1 which is heading to the sun. So we're heading to the sun, we're heading to the moon, we're also heading to our doom. But we'll be bringing you more news stories. I hope you enjoy listening to the podcast and do give me feedback. A great way to support the podcast would be to follow it on Spotify and to listen and to give it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. You can also drop a like on the YouTube video. That helps the video to reach more people. Also subscribe to the channel if you like the content. Share it with a friend who you think might want to listen to the stuff that's happening into the world and for exclusive interviews as well. I look forward to coming back on the mic soon and bringing you the news. Thank you for listening. Jai Hind.